Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Kato. A Russian drone struck a residential building in the Romanian city of Galați, close to the Ukrainian border, on Thursday night into Friday morning. While Russian drones entering Romanian airspace is sadly not a novelty, this was the first time a building was hit and people were wounded. As these Russian drone incursions become a more regular occurrence, we are joined by Reuben F. Director of Research at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, to tell us about the significance of this escalation. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So it's happened before in Romania. It's becoming more frequent in more EU and NATO member countries. But this means something more than an incident or incidents. What is Putin telling us?
Well, what they're telling us is that this is a traditional Russian sort of strategy, is that you keep pushing and pushing, and you keep trying to get closer and closer to that Article 5 violation. And if you're really clever and you're able to organize things properly, you engineer some type of an incident where, the people in Brussels say, well, was that really a violation? And then the Germans and the French will look at their shoes, and no one ever wants to pull the trigger and say, yep, that's a violation. We are now obligated to respond because it has severe implications. And Putin just wants to know how far he can go before he triggers that response.
So at what point does Article 5 kick in? Like, what is the wording of Article 5 to make it relevant to a situation like this? Because we keep hearing about Article 5, we keep hearing about Article 4. When does it kick in?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. And the first answer is that it says very simply that an attack on one member of the alliance is an attack on all members, and all members are required to respond. But I've attended more conferences and seminars and whatnot that I can count. And you asked the question, what, other than a direct military, an absolutely completely clear military assault and invasion, what other types of attacks, non-kinetic, like cyber attacks, or what other types of actions would trigger an Article 5 response, and what others are not up to that threshold? And if you ask that question of 20 different people, you'll get 20 different answers, I guarantee you.
So go on.
I said, well, that's just one of the areas that the Russians thrive on, this kind of ambiguity between allies, and it doesn't help that he keeps crossing red lines. I mean, he's crossed more red lines under this European Union government than Putin did under Obama in the United States, and it just never seems to be a point where people say, okay, that's enough.
Now, as soon as we hear news of these incidents, and we've had so many of them, as soon as they're released into the media, we hear strong statements of support, reminders of alliances. But my question is, has progress actually been made to secure airspace, make more progress into securing it ever since that first drone made an incursion into non-war territory?
Well, it's always kind of the same thing. Fighter aircraft were scrambled, but usually by the time they're scrambled, it's too late. And the only thing that's going to make a difference is there needs to be a huge increase in the air defense and anti-drone capabilities, particularly of these frontline nations, these nations that are right on the border with Ukraine and on the border with Russia. And there's still not enough of that hardware there, and the stuff that's really effective and being lauded recently has all been developed in Ukraine.
So with every next drone incursion upon NATO countries, upon the eastern flank, do you think that Moscow concludes that probing these European borders really carries little cost along NATO's eastern flank? So we're talking about these cyber attacks, sabotage, election interference, disinformation campaigns, undersea cable incidents, GPS jamming, airspace violence. I mean, there's so much of it. Yeah, repeated drone incursions. For Moscow, it sends a signal that essentially it's very little effort on their part.
Yeah, it's very little effort on their part, and it's also a case of the more they do of this, the more we become desensitized. I don't know if anyone still remembers now when there was a huge drone attack on Ukraine, and some of those drones crossed over into Poland. And
We remember in
when
Poland.
the drones that, yeah, I'm sure you do, but when those drones that landed on the ground in Poland were examined, when they were opened up, it turns out that the Russians put an extra fuel tank in there. Well, why would they do that unless they were intending for those drones not to hit targets in Ukraine and to carry on into Poland and to test NATO's reaction? So this is an old game for them. And until, as one of my colleagues says, until you hit them in the face with an iron, it's probably just going to continue.
So each incident is a test, and they obviously craft it. They want to get a response, and obviously each one of these events is carefully measured in Moscow. How do you think that Moscow is actually assessing these reactions?
Well, the Russians practice a particular type of military science, and so do the Chinese, because they taught the Chinese. It's called reflexive control. They have journals talk about it. They have military academics that write about it, study it. But basically what it comes down to is you engage in all kinds of provocative activity to see how your adversary will respond. And then you check and you see, okay, which unit moved where, who called who, what lines of communication were closed or open, what emergency services moved. And so this way you begin to see exactly what takes place when one of these violations occurs. So that way, since you know how everyone's going to react and how they're going to move, then you can kind of manipulate the system. And it becomes even easier now with AI, because with AI, you can map an awful lot of these reactions and you can correlate a lot of activity. And that's really the intention here, is for the Russians to figure out how they can manipulate members of the NATO alliance and still enact some gain for themselves.
Now, we have Pete Hegseth currently in Singapore, and he delivered a speech where he criticized European countries for their decisions both on immigration policies, insufficient spending on defense. And I wanted to ask you, how likely is it that the Trump administration will link their future U.S. security commitments in Europe to allies meeting stricter political and military expectations?
Well, first of all, Poland doesn't have to worry about this, because Poland are the best kids in class, as they say, in terms of their spending and their serious commitment to the alliance, and being right there on the, and Poland's been absolutely a fantastic ally. We all know that, and they are kind of, in that sense, they are kind of the South Korea of Europe, being that one nation you can really count on that's very, very robust. But I don't see the Trump administration getting to the point where they would deny supporting one nation or another. Trump will try and force as much as he can, but this is beginning to have blowback that's not good for the United States. For example, Canada just recently decided to buy a fleet of airborne early warning and control aircraft, like the U.S. AWACS, but a next generation. And they decided to buy them from Sweden rather than from the United States. And that's probably a direct result of the kind of pressure that Washington has put on these countries. So it's counterproductive. I don't see that they're going to be able to maintain that kind of an attitude or that kind of a policy without having to pay a price that's not worth it.
And on top of that, we have some issues coming up with the Trump and Iran ceasefire. There were discussions that perhaps suggested that there was some hope that the 60-day memorandum would be signed. Now it's very unclear whether any decision has come through. Do you think that it could pave the way for a broader nuclear agreement, or do you think it's just a temporary mechanism that will prevent further escalation in the region?
I don't want to be too critical of the people trying to put this Iran deal together, because I believe in situations like this, you have bad options and worse options. You don't get very many good ones. But I kind of question The intermediaries in this process are Pakistan. Okay. Now, everybody, please remember, it was Pakistan, specifically Dr. A.Q. Khan from Pakistan. These are the people that gave the Iranians the bomb. And so we're going to go to Pakistan to negotiate with the Iranians to get them to give back the bomb that the Pakistanis gave them to begin with. Somehow, that doesn't seem like a very winning proposition. I can't see this thing getting resolved until it reaches a point where the price that the Iranians have to pay is just so high, and that they realize their neighboring nations are so resolute that they just feel pressured into a corner. But until then, they're going to keep doing what they've been doing. They're going to keep delaying because that's always the game. The Western nations will eventually give up. We'll get tired. Our politicians will be afraid of losing elections because the petrol prices are so high. And they believe they can play that waiting game. And as long as they believe that, we're not going to get anything substantive out of this entire arrangement.
But the situation in the Strait of Hormuz has such a huge impact on the global economy. And it also impacts Trump's presidency to such a huge extent. Obviously, I don't want to get into American politics here, but surely the consequences of this, the whole crisis that has emerged out of this, has to lead to some resolution.
At some point, at some point there has to be a resolution, and of course.
But I mean, in the near future.
I don't know how for. Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with American politics, but we have in November, the Americans have in November, midterm congressional elections that take place 2 years after each presidential election. And the Republicans really need to hold on to their majority in the lower house, the House of Representatives. If they don't, they'll have severe problems. And a continuing spiral in petrol prices and all of the ripple effects of that, how the price of everything else goes up, is not going to help Republican lawmakers at the polls. So, yes, someone has to figure a way out of this. But I'm very skeptical because this is an Iranian regime which has never been known for acting in the best interests of its country and its population. They've only been known for acting in their best interest and the interests of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and that's about it.
But equally, without wishing to get to the genesis of this whole endeavor on Trump's part, surely we can agree that there was some huge mistakes made regarding Operation Epic Fury, and probably the best way forward would be to resolve the situation. And we've got so far that essentially getting to some kind of peace deal would be the best way forward, especially looking at the situation in Lebanon as well.
Well, I'll tell you the biggest mistake that was made, it was early on, is that we have Air Force special operations groups, and these are very, very elegantly trained individuals who are both, special ops soldiers, who are like Navy SEALs or Army Green Berets, but they're also very well trained personnel who have intimate knowledge of how to deal with nuclear materials. And those people should have been sent in the very beginning to those sites where we know this material is, to break in, grab that material, put it under wraps, and get it out of the country so that the Iranians don't have it anymore. And instead, we decided, well, we can keep bombing these sites and bombing them, and eventually we'll degrade that capacity. But depending on who you listen to, and depending on whose intelligence reports you believe, they still retain some degree of a nuclear enrichment capacity, which would be the first step to having a bomb.
Okay, we're going to pause our conversation there. I'm sure we'll have you back in the near future. Reuben F. Johnson, Director of Research at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good day.
You too. And that's a wrap for World Talks this Saturday morning. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you very soon at TVP World. Goodbye.